My name is Melvin Pedro, and I attended Brady when I was about 7, so that would be about 1965, and I attended until I was 19.
I'm Howard Pedro. I attended Brady from around about the age of 8, so that would be 1959, and really through the 60s is probably the best way to put it.
We lived in Whitechapel, very near the station, so it was probably about a 10-minute walk to Brady.
The area had a large percentage of boys who did attend Brady in the immediate area with us as well, and quite a few in the same block of flats where we lived.
The other reason I think Brady was very much intertwined with other things we're involved with, because we both went to Stepney Jewish Primary School, we both went to Central Foundation Boys School, and lots of people from both of those places went to Brady. Going back to our grandparents came over from Poland. Both sets of grandparents would have, at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And then our parents were born towards the end of the First World War. Then they always lived very much in the East End, either in Whitechapel or Aldgate or Stepney Green or some area like that, where a lot of Jewish immigrant families lived for many, many years.
Yeah, so very specifically our grandma lived overlooking all the market stalls in Petticoat Lane, quite a large family. And my father's mother, grandma on that side, lived in a street called Kinder Street, which is a street which wasn't far from where Cable Street was, so they're kind of very significant kind of Jewish areas. And then, I think quite a few people progressed. Most people moved into some form of council accommodation, which is where we lived in the corner of Sydney Street, which also became famous because that was opposite the Blind Beggar pub, where there was some famous or infamous activities that took place.
Sydney Street was also famous because there was a siege there,
Indeed.
which was handled by Winston Churchill many years ago. My mother stayed home and brought us up, and my father was a warehouse manager.
Previously, before we were born, was a dressmaker, and a lot of people worked in that kind of fashion business, if you want. So our sisters were furriers and so on. And my father would have potentially done something different, but he was conscripted and went in the forces, and when he came back, the family needed him to go out and work, basically, and he joined a family business in terms of the warehouse.
And he worked underneath the arches, the sort of famous railway arches in Bethnal Green, in fact.
So that's in Paradise Row, which, as Melvin said, is famous. It's the song by Bud Flanagan and Alan, underneath the arches down Paradise Row, and that's what it's based on.
I started to go to Brady because there wasn't that much else to do in the East End at the time. I mean, there was television, but television was in those days only on for fairly restricted hours, and particularly I think the programming for children was on very restricted hours. I think a number of my friends from school went there, and it was an opportunity to do something to fill in the evenings and the weekends, and where there were a lot of activities, I think, on offer, and it was pretty cheap, if I remember rightly, to actually go each week.
To some extent, Melvin may have gone there because I'd gone to Brady before. One of my uncles had gone to Brady, my cousin had gone to Brady. My sister only very briefly went to Brady, that's my eldest sister. Yeah, the vast majority of our schoolmates went to the youth club. It was an opportunity not only to do the things which we were passionate about, which was predominantly football, I suppose, at that time, but there was a lot of other activities which we then got exposed to and we'd heard about as well. And yeah, it did keep us off the streets, and indeed, probably the only risky bit was walking to Brady and back.
I remember getting attacked once. You probably remember it once. I got attacked once on the way home, and I was quite lucky in many ways because I had the back of my jacket slashed, and people said it could easily be in your back rather than just your jacket. So, there was a little bit between Valence Road and Hanbury Street where it was quite dark. Once you're on the main road, in general, it wasn't too bad.
No.
But there were a number of people who perhaps didn't like kids who went to Brady, who used to hang around the flats, well, didn't they? And possibly near the station as well.
In general, there's still a tremendous number of meth drinkers on the streets, homeless people. There was an enormous Salvation Army hostel up the road. I don't say they were threatening, but for younger children, it wasn't comfortable sometimes to go past them. But I think it was more the gangs. There were a certain number of gangs that used to hang around. It's not to say everybody who went to Brady was an angel. I must add that as well.
I mean, I'm not saying we were angels, but compared to some of the others, we may have been. Because I think some of the people who went to Brady, if Brady hadn't been there, I think they would have been very much going down a wayward path, and probably would have been part of the, if you like, rival gangs on the streets. And I think Brady stopped that happening. The purpose of Brady was to some extent to keep people off the streets. But I think it was also there to, probably enable Jewish kids to meet each other, and just to give to certain people an opportunity to do things that otherwise they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do, or the activities. And particularly, probably more in my time maybe than Howard's, in my later time at Brady, there were more and more probably non-Jewish kids who came to Brady as well. So although it was there to some degree as a Jewish meeting place, I think it was there also in a much wider ambit of just generally providing activities for kids who were living in, what was a, fairly poor part of London.
To use the expression, it was a shidduch making place. Shidduch means to make an arrangement between male and female. And certainly in the generation prior to mine, I would say a lot of marriages came out of it. It was an opportunity for them to socialise in that safe environment and perhaps make friendships. Getting towards the 60s where people were questioning lots of things, and people started to, in every sense of the word, intermix a little bit more than was in the past. And I would guess when it came to Melvin's time and there were more number of non-Jewish people going there, there would have been that as well. I mean, and that had happened even at schools, because by that stage, some of our school, even though it's called Stepney Jewish School, would be having some non-Jewish people. So, and people were moving, I'm just trying to think about, but people were moving out of the area as well, which was the other thing. I think it's true to say even what was called the Association of Jewish Youth Football Leagues started to have, and I'm not sure how many were allowed officially, started to have more non-Jewish players playing in it, to use that as the kind of example. If it was that free love generation started to come along that in between, it disrupted this kind of thing about everybody kind of gets together at a certain age and finds a partner and gets married and so on. So I think that was more society than particularly just to do with the club or anything like that.
I think that was connected probably to some degree with the fact that it was there to give people, if you like, a bit of Jewishness in a different way to a synagogue. And I think it did that because although not many people who went there were what you'd call very orthodox, quite a few people did keep kosher homes and eat kosher food, and Brady did provide that, which you couldn't necessarily get elsewhere. It also didn't do activities on Shabbat, but it did do things on Sunday, and of course in other organisations things did take place on Saturdays. So it provided at a time that Jewish people, if you like, were, and particularly their parents, I think, wanted their kids to do things. So I think it was helpful in that way as well. So I think you put all that together with, I think there was an element, which you did have a bit, I think, of a Jewish matchmaking service at a certain age, obviously not when we were very young. And so I think it was to keep that, if you like, Yiddishkeit going a bit. It did do that as well. And I think a lot of the leaders, a number of whom, or many of whom, I think, also weren't very orthodox. That was part of the reasons they were involved in the club. I think they were also involved because quite a lot of them had been pretty successful themselves. And they actually gave quite a lot of guidance to people on, how to get on in life and what to do.
My uncle used to go, but attend mainly and do drama and presentations. And for example, he was Moses, and they got a lot of the religious instruction through activities rather than religious following per se. And he certainly wasn't religious. But he had a great knowledge of the religion. This is probably going to sound a little bit contradictory here. There were many people who got a tremendous understanding, so some of the festivals were kept, for example, of it all, didn't necessarily believe in it, didn't necessarily follow it, but would be upset if it didn't exist. Brady kept things which were more the fun side, I suppose, of religion, is that the right way to put it? So you would have fancy dress competitions, you would light candles, you would do fun things. But if you really wanted to, there was an associated, I guess you'd call it a synagogue, where you could actually go to the services which were actually to do with Brady. It was a Brady synagogue, not to do with the youth club per se, because Brady was much more than just a youth club, and I'm not an expert on this. It was the Brady Club and Settlements, I think it was called. There was a whole other area of Brady.
A lot of people live a Jewish cultural life, if you like, as opposed to a Jewish religious life. And I think Brady fostered probably primarily the cultural life, and rather than, if you like, the belief in God and the real religious side. I think that's what it was there for.
I was attending the club when Jimi Hendrix did play, and it's one of those stories that people think you must be making up because it seems nearly impossible. Jimi Hendrix came there. I can't remember my age, unfortunately. I was probably far too young to go and see him, but we all went in, and he was on the stage, and I remember not only Jimi Hendrix playing, but the amazing thing was because Jimi Hendrix was playing the guitar with his teeth for quite a lot of the time, and it was one of his techniques, I believe. They used to have what they called a social.
Yes, that was on a Thursday.
Yeah, and so you'd go in there to be music, and normally that's supposed to be for boys and girls to mix in the social. Some did, and some, like many other parties that people go to, the boys would hang around the equivalent of the bar, they'd hang around the cafeteria, and the girls would dance together. But, you know, it was there.
I mean, we used to go, I think, 2 nights a week, and then on Sundays as well. And sometimes there would be social events on Saturday night maybe too. Most of the time when we went, it was connected with football. And in theory, you were supposed to go, I think, training at least 1 night a week, perhaps 2 nights a week, in order to be selected for the team on Sunday. I'm not sure if that rule was always adhered to. Usually you'd go for an hour playing, during the week playing in the gym, and then after they'd have a little break, and then you'd have, well, you'd either go sit in the canteen, or if it was on a Thursday night, you'd have the socials that we discussed earlier. It was slightly different in what was the minors, when you were under 11, because it used to start earlier and would finish earlier because of the younger age. There wasn't the post-football social, if you like, whereas when you got to the seniors, which was 11 and above, the social activities started to come in more. Big quiz teams, take part in inter-club quiz competitions. I can remember doing that quite a lot. Some people did, I think, quite a lot of drama. I mean, everybody at times got involved in some of the drama, but there were some who that was very much their main activity. So there were other areas, but certainly when I was there, I mean, I would say it was very, certainly from the boys' point of view, very heavily dominated by football and what happened after football.
Everybody could go to the top floor and play table tennis.
Yes,
and that was a real kind of big social activity in some ways, because everybody hung around those table tennis tables.
So there were 2 unstructured activities. There was the table tennis, you're right, I remember that. And the other one was there was a sort of playground area on the first floor, which used to have disorganised, I think one might call, games of football and other sports, which would become quite riotous, I think, because there wasn't really anybody organising it. So there was that sort of informal activity happened around the formal activities as well. I seem to remember that they had access to a box at the Royal Albert Hall.
Absolutely,
where people, which was, you know, for I think kids from the East End to be invited to a box at the Royal Albert Hall was a big cultural experience, really, wasn't it?
There was a guy called Frank Austin who owned the company, ran a company called Austin Sweet Furniture, and he had a box there, and quite a lot of time he didn't use it, and he thought it was a good idea for all the, as Melvin said, the youngsters from the East End to go there, see some classical or listen to some classical music, any other activities one. Certainly that was my first exposure really to true classical music. And he had a squash court in his garden, which is something else, so you know, you could see he had quite a good business, but nevertheless he used to invite us, and that again was the first time I ever played squash, was to go there. So there were lots of philanthropists who donated both time, effort, energy, and I think influence.
Because they came from a certain background and feel perhaps they were quite fortunate with what they've achieved. So I think people did it. I'm not possibly an example of early social responsibility. That could be right. One that stands out in a strange way is the trip abroad. We went to a place called Grobbendonk in Belgium, which I think is somewhere near Antwerp. And it was memorable, I think, because this was the very first time I'd ever gone abroad. So it was a big adventure. in that sense. And it was also memorable because it was such a horrible place. And it's memorable because everyone thought, gosh, we've come here, we're here for 2 weeks, and it was a bit of a dump. It was probably some old military camp or something like that, I think. But having said that, we had a good time, but I can remember everybody thinking it was just like hell on earth, the actual buildings. But we made the most of it, and we went out. And I think because it was things like, I think I must have been about 15 at the time, I think something like that probably, and going abroad, and then we were allowed out of camp, or Grobbledonk, it was always called, it was a camp abroad. And of course it was so amazing. I think it was so different to anything I'd experienced before, because you had the sort of the way you had in Belgium, the sort of bars and that sort of thing where people sit out. It was very different to the pubs we had in England as it is now. So it was a whole different experience, and that was very memorable. I think it just stands out.
Went to the Isle of Wight for a camp trip, and it was just vast, the number of people we had attending. I can't remember exact numbers, but it was enormous. And it was so exciting and so different to go around there, and the activities were unbelievable. We went to the south of France, and I had been abroad twice before. I'd been to Paris to a wedding and spent some time wandering around there by myself. So I had an idea of wandering around and abroad and what it was like, and I was only 30, it was just after my mitzvah. And I'd also done a day trip many years before my father to Dieppe, and that was very exciting. I then suddenly went with Brady Youth Club on this very long coach trip, and we went down to the south of France to a place called La Napoule, which is just outside Cannes. And we stayed in, it was dormitory accommodation, but we had an outdoor swimming pool, and we had all these other facilities. But they'd taken the chef, so we should have kosher food. Like, no, it's the word chef, and he was called the chef. The guy who ran the canteen in Brady was taken down there. All the food was taken down to the coach. We had it all catered there. We weren't allowed to eat out at all. We could go and get, I think it was Coca-Cola or something like that. We didn't supposed to drink, of course, even though, I should say again, I think we were 17 at the time or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But we went to the south of France, and we went to Cannes, and we went to Nice, and these incredible beaches. And we even liked going to Grasse to smell the perfume that was being produced. And this was a whole world away from the East End of London. We hadn't been there. And so it was unbelievably memorable. And we just had all this freedom, and I won't talk about what some of the boys get up to. It was the kind of age where people are actually discovering things at the best of times, and suddenly there was all these amazing French ladies talking all beautifully on the beach. Nevertheless, we still did all the things you would do because you'd gone with Brady. We played football against the locals, and we played cricket against them, and I think it was the first time we probably played rounders on the beach against someone and this kind of stuff. And volleyball on the beach. And of course we all got shocked and couldn't believe you had to go and pay to go on some of the beaches. So it was a fantastic experience. The managers who took us seemed very calm about it. I personally found all the managers very easygoing with me and respectful of me, if that's the right way to put it. I won't say everybody was respectful of all the managers, but overall they were. That's quite something, and the vast majority being volunteers as well, of course. So the whole thing is memorable in that way.
I suppose to us, in a way, probably going to like Belgium would be like me now going to Australia, if you like. It would have that sort of magnitude of experience.
Definitely.
I think the club had quite an impact on our lives, and it was possibly a bit to do with the fact, although I think, our parents gave us all that we really, really wanted when we were growing up, they weren't probably very driven people. Whereas I think at Brady they did try and drive you to achieve more, and there were people there who, even though you were from the East End, they'd achieved, they showed you what you could achieve, and quite often they actually helped you to get perhaps work placements and or give you advice on what you should do with things like going to university and that sort of thing, which was perhaps quite difficult to get otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think also if you want expanded our horizons, for want of a better way of putting it. And interesting enough, even though they were both in their own ways quite keen on sport, they weren't the types of parents who come and stand by the touchline and watch you play football or take you over the tennis court to play. These were things either we got for ourselves or through the youth club itself. Some of those early contacts are quite important, I think. Just gives you another insight on the world and some different views from your own parents. And I think in a funny sort of way, I think that is coming back to that balance between freedom and control. Somehow they injected this information into you without ramming it down your throat. And for lots and lots of people I know, that really worked well. And they acted more like friends, but they were the people in charge nevertheless. And they seemed to get that balance just right.
I think it gave you a sense of confidence, which I think was important
Yeah.
as well. You know, so when you came into other situations, you could handle them better. Perhaps because you'd had a slightly wider, if you want, cultural experience, but just generally, they were good at giving people, I think, confidence. Perhaps in the same way that we were saying earlier, that I think sometimes private schools are good at that, in not just giving the basics, but they actually, you know, give people the confidence to deal with situations. And I think Brady did that very well.
Yeah, every type of person they did try to cater for in one way or another, and every type of activity. And then one critical important thing, and I do think it is important, I think Melvin touched upon it earlier, was it really cost peanuts to do your subs there. People could afford to go and do it, and indeed if you couldn't afford, they would have paid for you anyway. And I think that's the most important thing. I think if you had to pay for the activities we did, or even pay the true cost of some of those trips we did, that it would have been absolutely impossible. So I think that whole experience, it gave most people a step up.